In the Emerald Isle, something unexplainable is happening. Tonight, prepare to witness the most frightening event in horror podcast history. A journey into the depths of horror history. First Class Horror presents the Class Horror Cast. Evil wears many masks, but pure horror wears only one. Support First Class Horror on Patreon for as little as $1. Can't get enough of the horror? Carve yourself a deal from official merchandise, only on Teespring. Join us on all social media at First Class Horror. We have such sights to show you.
Anthony DiBlasi followed in his dad's footsteps and became both a horror and movie lover from a young age. All through his teens he made movies and one day vowed to make it to Hollywood. After graduating from film school at Emerson College in Boston, he moved to LA and began interning for Marvel. Through sheer determination, he got an internship and eventually full-time work alongside the legendary Clive Barker. He was key executive and producer on movies such as Midnight Meat Train and Book of Blood. He made his directorial debut with Dread, based on Clive Barker's short story. He directed and co-wrote the critically acclaimed horror movie Last Shift and followed up with Extremity in 2018, which is based on extreme haunts with a twist. Anthony is both a fan of the genre and an expert. We talked about some behind-the-scenes stories you may not have known, some exciting future projects, and some great advice for following your dreams. I hope you all enjoyed this as much as I did. So from the time then Last Shift comes out, you had another quick turnaround then and had directed Most Likely to Die, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And how was the experience on that?
That was great. Another, great team of people. Most Likely to Die. The bummer with that is we never got to do a sequel.
Mm-hmm.
we really wanted to turn that into kind of a 1, 2, 3.
That would have been fun.
Thing we were planning, and they sold that movie to Netflix. And it did really well for them on Netflix. But the company, horror was not their focus, so it just never turned into another movie. But the shoot was a hard shoot. Most Likely to Die was hard. We were doing a very ambitious movie with not a lot of money. And the only thing I think we had a great cast in that movie and a great, I really love The Graduate and how his design turned out. I think he's would have been a strong kind of movie maniac if he had moving forward with another movie. But with that, we were compromised in some of our gags and some of our kill gags and things like that because of constraints with the budget, and we had some issues during production and things like that, and scheduling with Busey and things that I wish I got to tweak along the way, but overall I'm pretty happy with that movie. I think it turned out pretty well.
Yeah, and that's a fun one for I'm a huge slasher guy, so it was fun to see a different character, like a cool killer with the mask and stuff was cool, and just it was unique because that style of movie can feel quite generic at times, and I thought it was fun. It would have been cool to see a trilogy.
Yeah, and it's funny because it the way I get it into some of these movies, like when I read that script, it was it was like, oh, this is like a 90s slasher, and the writer had written it several years prior, and it felt like something that had come out of that era of urban legend and Scream and Valentine, and a very, like, there's this very slick kind of 90s slasher era. You know, I Know What You Did Last Summer. And it felt like it just was written for that time period. And I really wanted to embrace those aspects of, like, that some people may saw as a negative, but to me, I was like, these are things that I liked about these movies, like the long expositional, this is why we did this, you know, this is why I did this kind of 20-minute sequence in the third act of, like, you reveal the killer and then you reveal his motive. That was very intentional, you know, to design it that way and have, like, a twist and a turn. And, you know, it wasn't like, you know, some people were like, oh, that's why, you know, what's this exposition scene? But it was all designed to be like that kind of 90s era slasher, which they all have that stuff if you go back and watch them.
Yeah, it is a pity just to hear you say that. Now, I didn't know that you guys had wanted to do sequels like that so much, so that kind of sucks.
Oh, the sequel, man, the sequel would have been, because the sequel, it was all laid out. The sequel would have been at the reunion, because the whole movie is like a lead up to this reunion, and we wanted to do the reunion would have been the next night. That would have been so it would have continued into that. You know, the surviving characters would have had to jump right into this, continuing to their essentially this master plan, which was like a 3-part plan and of like the reunion. And then we talked about the third one being the high school graduation of that year's class and how it tied into the older class, the reunion class. So it was like kind of this 3-prong graduate master plan of revenge.
So the I guess your most recent movie, right, is from 2018. I think it might have released a little bit later over here.
Extremity, yeah.
Yeah, it might have been 2019, I think, before it came to Ireland and the UK. I'm a huge haunt guy.
Oh yeah,
yeah, and this was a fun one for me to see that incorporated, but in a completely different way. Not what I expected. In a good way.
Cool.
How was it working on that? Did you guys? How much input did you have in the movie and the whole aspect of it?
A lot. They had David, one of the producers on that. I had known him years earlier. We did this like short together that never saw the light of day. And they're all in Canada, and they approached me and they were like, "Hey, we got this script," and it was actually with Rebecca Swan, who I knew from Dread. They were one of the writers on Dread when it was at Fox in one of those early iterations of the PG-13 version. So I was like, "Oh, that's cool. Let me read the script." And it was, you know, this extreme haunt movie, and it was called The Manor at the time because it was mainly kind of based on McCamey Manor. Yeah. And when I read it, I was like, "This is cool. I like this world is fascinating." I'm like, I saw a lot of elements of Dread in this project, and to me, going into it, for me, it was a bookend on a chapter. This bookend of Dread and Extremity, and they're almost the same movie from totally different point of views. And if you would watch them back to back, they'd make a good double feature. In that, so when they sent me the script, I was like, I see a lot. I love this kind of these characters, and I want to bring it in the States. We have this other extreme haunt called Blackout, which originated in New York, right? So Blackout is a much more psychological extreme haunt, And McCamey Manor is this like extremely physical extreme haunt. So I wanted to merge those elements. So we did a couple rewrites in the script to getting this like amalgam of the both, of the two things, of this kind of ultimate haunt place. And, but also not, you know, and the same thing with Dread. It's like Dread, it wasn't about like scaring people. And, you know, Extremity, it wasn't about scaring people. And that, you know, that's tricky for some horror movie watchers. You gotta love horror in a different kind of way when you watch a horror movie to not be scared. Mm-hmm. You know, and, you know, people like us, we watch all kinds of horror and not all, you know, you watch a movie like Funny Games. Funny Games is not a scary movie. You know, Funny Games is fucked up and it's bothersome and it's an agitating movie and it's not a movie you want to go watch again. You know, most people don't want to sit down and like, let me watch that movie. I got to put that on right away, you know. And so Extremity was, again, you know, to kind of pull back the curtain of the people running the place so early on. And also telling that side of the story and telling the side of the story with the person going into the haunt. The thing that I'm most throughout my career and the characters that I'm most intrigued with are characters. I really love the aspect of life that you don't know people. Like you always have to be cautious with humanity, you know, with human nature, with strangers, with friends, you know, that there are layers to a person's psyche that you can never be intimately, truly knowledgeable of, right?
Yeah.
And I really like that aspect of, let's say, exploring that in film, about that, the outsider, the outcast, or the, you know, the person that with Extremity, it was all about, well, okay, people often go into this in a way, they're like, oh, I'm going into extreme haunt. Show me what that extreme haunt, how extreme they're going to be. To me, what I really found interesting was the flip side of that. Well, who are the people coming into this? Mm-hmm. Who are the people who are seeking this out? Yeah. And, you know, like my buddy Steven, he used to work at Halloween Horror Nights in Florida. He used to, you know, and he always, his first night on the job, he was a scare tech, you know, he was a scare, I can't remember, they have an official name for the
scare actor.
The scare actors, right? Literally the second Halloween horror, the Halloween Horror Nights opened, someone punched him square in the nose.
Yeah.
Nearly broke his nose. You know, so there's that element of it. It's like, who are you letting in to the haunted house? Mm-hmm. You know, and that was, I wanted to explore that in a very kind of non-linear way with Extremity.
Yeah, I definitely, because I don't want to say too much about the movie because I'll start spouting some spoilers, and I kind of want people to go and watch it. But as somebody who, like, I travel to Florida every year for Halloween Horror Nights.
Oh, cool.
I'm in the process of, I've vaguely been in touch with Russ McCamey. So I'm kind of backpedaling on my whole idea. So the original idea was for me to do this big kind of thing and maybe have a short documentary made about me traveling from Ireland to do McCamey Manor. Yeah. I'm kind of, once he reached out to me, so I told the story before. What basically happened was I had started to put the feelers out online with different people, and I was talking to different people who run haunts who were kind of high up in that industry, I guess. But somehow it got back to Russ, I think, that I was looking to do this.
Sniffing around.
Yeah, and I get this email one night at like 3 a.m. Obviously, it's Irish time, so there's a completely different... I get a random email with just a phone number in the email. And I'm like, what the hell? And I'm like half asleep. And I'm like, what the hell is this? And then I look and it's Russ McKamey. And he just has ... call me.
Yeah.
And like already I was like, this is what he does. He freaks people out before they even get there. I was like,
yeah.
And then I started to backpedal. I was like, maybe I won't do it. Maybe I'll just like chat with him and not do it. But
I mean, it depends on what you're into, right? And you know, with Extremity, I went so deep dive on these things. You know, if you're into physical torture, then go to McKamey Manor.
Not really.
You know, I mean, he's using military and essentially, you know, CIA tactics, you know, to get a response out of the body that you can't control, or at least most people can't control. You know, it's again, the buildup, just like what he's starting already with you, and that the interview that's like fucking, I don't know, 8 hours long, like where you have to sign the contract. That's like CIA torture, you know, and then getting in there and like slapping your face and pulling your hair and locking you in a box. These things that, you know, aren't extremely painful, they put the body in a state of fight or flight and shock. And then everything becomes a million times worse.
Yeah.
So if you're into that, do it. Man.
I'm not really. The whole reason that I came up with that idea originally was because I had become obsessed with these extreme haunts from watching films like Extremity and different things. And I really wanted to peel back the curtain on something like that, but I don't think that Russ is a fan of that. He would much rather than have me travel there with somebody else to do it, he would rather, I think, I enjoy it.
Yeah.
I don't think he really likes to let people in to just have a look-see.
Yeah.
Which I get. Look, it's part of his thing and that's what it is. But yeah, when it was put in front of me, I kind of backed off the idea a lot. Did
you watch Haunters?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, he got John, when we did Extremity, we were together a lot. He interviewed me for the Blu-ray on Extremity, and the movies were kind of released back to back, and we did some double features because they were so kind of tightly knit. And Haunters was, I mean, he got to know Russ pretty well during that time. And there's so much footage that they could not use, you know, that kind of behind the curtain stuff.
I can only imagine. I'm actually supposed to be doing something with John in a couple of weeks. He was one of the people who I had originally spoke to about Russ, and he was just kind of hands off. He was like, "Look, man, do whatever you want to do. I'm not advising."
Yeah. Cool. What are you doing? Are you guys hanging out? Or are you?
No, we're just going to have a chat and whatever, and hopefully when all this stuff with this travel and pandemic, then we can maybe figure something out then. But as for right now, I think I'm trapped in Ireland.
Yeah, sure.
For eternity.
It's like Escape from New York.
I know, yeah. So I have a few final questions because I know you're a busy guy and I appreciate you taking the time. So what are some of your favorite horror movies? It doesn't have to be one in particular. Is there anything that jumps to mind that you find yourself you will watch over and over?
Yeah, I mean, it really is, you know, us, I think horror people are big on traditions, you know, meaning like, you know, Halloween is a traditional time of year. And that's, the movies that I mentioned earlier, Fright Night, Lost Boys, American Werewolf in London. And it's funny because they're not movies I make. Like, and maybe I need to realign my focus and kind of do something like that in the future and maybe I'll have such a blast at it because the movies I really like to watch over and over again are so different from the movies I like to make.
Yeah.
And you know, who knows why that is, but, you know, I love the Scream franchise. And my wife loves it. I can never get sick of watching the Scream movies. and she's a big fan of the Scream movies. And, The Shining, I haven't watched Shining in quite a few years, but that was one of the only movies that really scared me growing up and, still freaks me out. And then the Phantom of the Paradise, I love a lot, if you could call that a horror movie.
Do you have any, again, I won't call them guilty pleasures, do you have any comfort movies? Maybe something that by the general population is seen as a not so good movie?
I mean, let me look at I like the Monster Club a lot. Mm-hmm. Don't know if you've ever seen that.
Yeah, so good.
I really like that movie. I just made my wife watch that movie and she was like, I don't know about this. But I love that movie. Yeah. I would love to remake that movie.
I would love to see that remade. That would be so good.
Just the music, the club, the stories. I don't know. There's just that is a movie I really adore. And I think most people will watch now and be like, this is cheesy as fuck.
It's so good.
It's great. And then, what else? A movie that's not horror, but is just of this Hard Ticket to Hawaii. Mm-hmm. You ever seen Hard Ticket to Hawaii? A movie like that. That's a guilty pleasure. Those movies are just spectacular to me. It's like its own art form now. You go back and watch those movies.
I haven't seen that one in so long, actually. I need to put that on the rewatch list. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it's like back then, those movies with we had Rhonda Shear, Up All Night with Ron, from how Elvira had her. Did you have versions of that in Ireland, which was like the late night movie host, Joe Bob Briggs and things like that? Yeah.
So, things like Hard Ticket to Hawaii would have been a staple for those kind of Rhonda Shear, TBS, TNT, Up All Night kind of things. But those Andy Sedaris, all his films. And, back then these these are cheesy, Skinamax movies. But man, you watch them now and it's like the Mona Lisa,
it is. Yeah,
it really is. There's just something that's so charming about it now. And it's the way it looks, the way it's shot, the production. You watch these movies, you're like, how did this movie get made? How do these movies, cause they weren't small budget. I mean, you look at it now and back then they were like, oh, what is this piece of crap? Cause you'd be comparing it to other big action movies. But now you look at it and you're like, these movies had actually a pretty high production value for what they were. They're shot on, they're shooting them on film and they're got all these, set pieces and there's something just kind of special about them.
Yeah. And it's, I was talking with Patrick Lussier recently and he worked as the editor on Scream and Halloween H2O and all these different movies, and we kind of touched on what you just did with the impact that some of those movies have had, and even a physical release of something. There's times where I'll pick up a DVD for a movie that, like you said before, I mean, art is subjective, so, but there is movies like Midnight Meat Train for me is one of those movies when I pick it up, even just to look at the case every time before I watch it. I don't know, I just get this nice feeling. It just makes me feel good. It's crazy to think that, these things have been created and will live, through all these timelines.
Yeah.
It's such an odd thing, I guess, maybe to explain to somebody who's not a fan of film or not a fan of horror, how you can get that experience from it. But it's bizarre.
I talked to my wife about this a lot. There's something like what you just hit on, and maybe it's material for its own horror movie, but nostalgia has almost become a physical sense in our life that didn't exist before. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the last 10 years of like political strife and or just the resurgence of 80s nostalgia. Nostalgia has entered people's lives in a much more physical way. It's almost like we yearn to hold something that gives us that sensation that was like what you just said. And I don't know if it's because of the internet and streaming and the further away we get from a physical medium, we're losing these things that we once had. And I don't know what it is, but so many people, I think, across the globe are having this overwhelming sense of this need for nostalgia and picking up a Blu-ray and what does this mean? And like, what is this cover? And like holding a cassette, an 80s cassette. I have a cassette in my car, a cassette player in my car, and I like bought all these old cassettes, and it's like, my wife's like, maybe the world ended and we're all just like revisiting the past or something, but there's something happening on this kind of global level of this need to maintain something from our past in a physical form.
Yeah. And it's funny because like I see all these different companies and different, I guess, freelancers crop up where, they will transfer a movie that was released on Blu-ray back to VHS. Back to VHS, yeah. And it's like, and I mean, I love that idea, but I think you might be right in the sense of, I mean, even with, there's a series of books out called Ad Nauseum, and it's just a collection of old artwork and posters from movies from the 70s, 80s, 90s. And like, sometimes I just sit there and it's like a coffee table book. I just flick through it. And it brings me back to the video store that yeah. Sometimes it I guess pains me that I won't have that experience with my kid. You know, the Friday night, school is finished for the weekend, let's go to the video store and pick up. And you actually had to, I guess in a way, look, don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking streaming, but I do definitely feel like when you had to take that the trip to the store, you became like the curator of your own. I don't even know how to explain it, but there was times I would pick a movie up based even just on the artwork and give it a chance. Totally based on the artwork. That was the main thing at the video store. It was like, let me walk down these aisles and say, oh my God, look at that movie. Like, I want to watch that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, most of the time you're let down, but still, yeah, it is, in that nostalgia is a very bittersweet sensation, right? It's like this loss of something, but this immense connection to how we felt when we, at the moment that it existed. And it is a certain thing, don't get me wrong. I love digital collections too. There's something amazing about like, I can keep all my songs on my phone, or I can have every movie at the flick of a button, like I don't have to, like, remember the days we'd go to Blockbuster and like 30 times to rent a movie? Like, what a pain in the ass that was. Like, what the heck? Like, I can't rent this damn movie. I just want to watch this movie. And now we just turn it on and rent it. It's right there, yeah. And there is a younger generation will never understand that treasure hunt aspect of things that we would have about like finding a movie or renting a movie or the journey itself in doing that. Because I think that was maybe I didn't realize at the time, but that was as much a part of watching the movie. Yeah. The whole experience of going and getting this movie and bringing it back. If you could give a piece of advice to somebody for following their dreams, what would it be? Man,
5 years ago, I could answer that question really easily, but now it's the landscape of, well, dreams in general. I think whatever, if you have a dream, the worst part about having the dream is not pursuing it, right? Because you don't want to be left with regret. Pursue, and when I was younger, I had enough people come up to me and say, don't do X because it will ruin your life, right? I wish I did Z instead. And what that tells me is that there's a lot of people who are adults who regret their decisions, So that was enough to put me in a position to set my sights on, listen, there's something I want to do. I'm going to do it. I'm going to try to do it. And I'm going to give it my all to the extent, when I was, I was working, when I was in Massachusetts, I was working nights and going to college in the daytime and, paying student loans and not sleeping and doing movies on the weekends and getting involved in as much things as I could. And I remember even in college, because I commuted to college, I did not live at Emerson.
All right. Okay.
I felt like I was missing out when I was commuting. And I remember talking to one of the teachers and man, I saying that to him, the film teacher, I'm like, I feel like I'm missing out on this stuff. He's like, well, you should do X, Y, and Z, You should join FPS, which was the big film thing. And, you got to put that extra time in. And, so I did. So I was like, all right, fine. I'm going to stay after school. I'll stay on campus till 11 o'clock at night, and then I'll come home, and then I'll go to work at midnight. And it's that pursuit of that dream to its fullest extent, so you can look back on it and say, well, at least I tried. I can't say I don't regret that moment. I wish I could give better advice on how to get into the business, because right now it's all over the place right now, especially with what the last couple years has done to entertainment. Now, but it's so much more accessible now too. You can go buy an iPhone and shoot a movie on it in your spare time, and you could get it into a great festival or show it to people are more accessible now. You can look up your favorite filmmaker on Instagram and try to get their attention. It's so both oversaturated and easily accessible that it's the most and best. It's the worst and best of both worlds.
Yeah.
I
could definitely see that. And I think a lot of times, because a lot of people, always tweet me or message me and, could you ask this person this, and could you ask, and this advice or following a dream comes up constantly. And I think people's biggest problem probably is they never seem to ask, how do I do what you've done, or how do I do? It always seems to revolve around, how do I take the leap, or how do I not listen to everybody at home or my friends or this or that? I guess getting off the starting blocks for people seems to be the actual act of doing it is the problem. Yeah. And,
I think that is the biggest thing for a lot of people. I never had that issue. I never had that voice in my head that told me not to. And that may be how people are raised. I had my parents, whatever, everyone's got their problems with their families and their youth and whatnot. But my parents were very supportive in the arts. And that is because my father wanted to be in the arts and just never, and he regretted those decisions early on in his life. I mean, listen, my father fought in the Korean War. He had his own shit, he was from a different era of, he had things he had to deal with, but he regretted that. I wish I had done that. I wish I had tried a little harder, taken those extra, and so they were very supportive of me always pursuing artistic things. When I sat down to draw a picture or take an art class or, play drums, join a band, these are all things I did, in different aspects, or make a movie with my friends. My parents never said, don't do that. It's a waste of time. So I never developed that voice in my head. And I think a lot of people have that voice in their head, that voice of reason telling them, you'll never make money doing this. And maybe you won't, but maybe you will. And just because you make money at something, you don't have to make money at something to pursue it,
Yeah. Yeah. It must have been, nice for your dad to see this all kind of pay off, especially being, I think you said he's a horror fan as well.
Oh yeah, it's huge. And my father's from an older generation, but he's still alive. He's in his 90s now. And when I was making Midnight Meat Train, I flew them to LA, my mom and my dad, and they came on the set and played with all the props and sat in all the chairs and sat in my producer's chair and took all, it was like.
That's cool. I like that.
Yeah. He had a blast doing that stuff.
Okay, so handful of things left. If you could direct, someone asked me to ask you, if you could direct any existing horror IP or franchise, what would you choose and why? I'm assuming they're alluding to, Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, Hellraiser.
Yeah, listen, Scream would have been one. I'm glad those Ready or Not guys are doing it because I really enjoyed Ready or Not. And I love that franchise. I'm glad it's going. Nightmare on Elm Street would be a big one. I feel like that's a franchise that they let go too soon. Yeah. I think it's got legs. Yeah. A movie like Monster Club or Phantom of the Paradise, two movies I'd love to remake. For sure.
Yeah, Nightmare on Elm Street, I think, is one that, if it's done correctly, you can completely reintroduce his character again.
Yeah.
Which I think would be fantastic. So what's the future look like for you? I know you probably can't talk specifically about anything. Is there anything that we can look forward to? Well,
I was very specific with Extremity, and when I jumped on board Extremity and looking at it very closely as a bookend to a certain chapter in my filmic life, because, after Extremity, and I said very consciously, I don't really want to sit down and direct other people's movies anymore, and because I feel like my strongest films are the ones that I hold the closest relationship to are the ones that I wrote.
Yeah. And
I do write. When I was, when I was doing Midnight Meat Train in those years with Clive, there are a slew of movies I've written that, have just never seen the light of day, went through development hell and in the studio system or whatnot. So I have a whole writing life that people would never connect, to you look at my resume and the movies I've directed. So it was more important for me to make that connection again, to make sure that my effort and time is going into things that I'm very passionate about. So I started writing things more, and that's, I'm right now getting into that zone where I'm going to start directing again. One thing that I am working on is doing something in the Last Shift world.
Oh, wow. Nice.
So that is going to continue.
Okay. So that's something for people to look forward to then.
That's something for people to look forward to.
So final question then is that I ask everybody, because I'm always interested to hear the different answers. So why horror, and what does it mean to you? Well,
horror to me, and I guess, and it comes down to one of these, the original question is it was very early on, it was introduced very early on in my life. It became a very like important part of my life, either watching Universal monster movies with my father and then watching horror movies. And then that aspect of really looking at like this man turning into a werewolf in both the Universal movie and American Werewolf in London, and being like, man, that is amazing. Like, how do I get in on that?
Mm-hmm.
And making a horror movie is, and it's just such a fun experience. And because it's funny because you're dealing with like gruesome stuff, but it's such a light, oftentimes a very light, interactive, inclusive experience with the cast and crew, because you really have to get your hands dirty. Mm-hmm. You really have to embrace a lot of different aspects of filmmaking, of like a lot of the emotional spectrum on a horror movie, and for actors is extreme, going from, okay, here you're, laughing and now you're getting your head cut off. Like, that's extreme. Yeah. So everything that goes with that, it's such a visceral ride making a horror movie, and it involves so many things that I love. Sound design, music, art, drawing a picture of something that's going to turn into a monster down the road. It just and making a maquette from that monster, and then turning that into an effects design and watching it get put onto someone or get turned into a puppet, and then put in front of the camera, and how do we shoot it and how do we make it look real? All that stuff is what draws me to horror,
And it's great to hear you say that from the side you're on, because I think as a fan and as an audience, they experience all them things as well.
Yeah.
So it's
exactly.
It's cool to see that it's on both sides of the camera. It's
on both sides.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. There's only one genre where you can get covered in bodily fluids and just, say, I don't have time to wash that off. We're making a fucking horror movie here.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time. I really do. I know you're probably super busy trying to get stuff done and prepped. So I appreciate you taking some time out of your day.
No, thanks for having me. It's been great.
Where can people find you then? Your Instagram is...
I'm on Instagram. It's Aunt DiBlasi is my main handle there. And then, that connects to Facebook now.
Okay. Yeah.
But that's where you'll find all my movie updates and stuff.
Great. Well, it's been great chatting to you. For anyone listening, guys, the link will be down below for the Instagram and links to all of Anthony's movies as well.
Support First Class Horror on Patreon for as little as $1. Can't get enough of the horror? Carve yourself a deal from official merchandise, only on Teespring. Join us on all social media at First Class Horror. We have such sights to show you.